Thereforcare is brought to you by CareScout, with the goal of sharing real-life conversations about aging care. Views expressed on this program are the speaker's own. We don't provide medical, legal, tax, financial, or other professional advice. Always talk to your own professional advisors for advice tailored to your needs.
What is the aging care crisis in America?
Today, roughly 70 million Americans are over the age of 65. The demand for long-term care is about to increase in a way that we haven't seen before. This is happening at a time when supply for care is decreasing quite rapidly, which is going to create just a dearth of supply. My father had a heart attack and a stroke within 2 months of each other. I felt helpless. I saw firsthand how challenging the ecosystem of care provision was. And that's when this desire to there has to be a better way came up. We fundamentally believe that aging can be with confidence and with dignity. If you do the right things, you can age with grace. Aging can be living vibrantly in your years. Plan for what you want, communicate with those around you, and then frankly, make sure that they are on the same page. And if we're able to do that, hopefully we will make the aging journey for the next 70 million better than it was for the previous set that went before it.
Hi, welcome to the thereforcare podcast by CareScout, a podcast all about aging care, whether you're navigating it for yourself or for your loved ones. I'm Amy Rein, and today we're going to get into the aging care crisis in America. How did we get here? What are the contributing factors, and how do we get out of this? Most importantly, we're going to talk about how we as individuals can best prepare ourselves for this phase of life so that we can enjoy every last moment with our loved ones. Today, we have Samir Shah, the CEO of CareScout Services, joining us for the conversation. Samir brings 20 plus years of time in the financial and aging care services industries, building products and service offerings that improve people's lives. We are going to get into the aging care crisis in America. We're going to talk a little bit about what that crisis means and some of the contributing factors. And most importantly, we're going to get into how we as individuals and as a system can work together to make sure when we get to that point in our lives that we have the information we need to make good decisions and enjoy every last moment with our loved ones. So with that, let's get into it, Samir. Age wave, silver tsunami, there's all sorts of impending doom-like terms for this demographic shift that is happening in our country. Can you just level set us on what is the aging care crisis in America?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I'm so glad we get to do this and share some of the learnings and the research we have with the broader community. The aging crisis, this is a theme that has caught on over the last few years. But I'm here to tell you that I think it's not only incredibly important for all of us to pay attention to, it's also incredibly urgent in where the cycle is. Today, roughly 70 million Americans are over the age of 65. And starting next year, the first of the boomers starts to turn 80. And over the next several years, we'll see a trend where almost 6,000 people turn 80 every single year. So with 20% of the population that is over 65, and then soon many of them over 80, the demand for long-term care is about to increase in a way that we haven't seen before. As that demand rises, the kind of demand for long-term care is also rising. People have more complex needs as they go into their later years. With the help of medicines and supplements and medical devices, people are living longer, but they also need help a lot more longer. So demand for care and the kind of demand for care is rising faster than it ever has. This is happening at a time when supply for care is decreasing quite rapidly. At a more fundamental level, caregivers are exiting the care system, and we're seeing an immigration rhetoric that is going to further put stress on the caregivers that are in the economy. So with rising populations and increasing demand and reducing supply, we're seeing forces go opposite to each other, which is going to create just a dearth of supply, particularly when America ages. I think all of this is also happening at a time when trust in the long-term care system has been eroded. Over the last 20 or 30 years, insurance companies have had challenges. Over the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen many large names in the care navigation and the care planning phase come under scrutiny for their practices or lack of practices. So at a time when America is aging, supply is decreasing, and trust is no longer in the system, I think we're indeed at a point where we are in an aging crisis. And we as a society need to make sure that we affect it now so that it doesn't get any worse.
Yeah. So when I think about all of the forces that you just talked about, these are sort of slow demographic shifts, right? Like this is just people getting older. This shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone. So can you talk a little bit about how we got here, right? Like why haven't we planned for this? And
yeah, look, I think you're right. These macro trends take years to come together. But the confluence of all of this all happening at the same time is perhaps what's causing the crisis to be more meaningful at a time like this. The confluence of the fact that people are now living a lot longer. Families may not be as locally cohesive than as they were maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago. Medical systems that evolved when it came to regular healthcare and medical care did not evolve when it took into account long-term care. Public funding mechanisms that over time have really supported Social Security did not have a vehicle for long-term care. Private companies that played in the space maybe 20 or 30 years ago, over the last decade have really exited. So you've seen a 10-year, 15-year decline in all of the resources that existed in the space, with no supplemental increase in public markets, private markets, or individuals, frankly, taking action to really change that. So the combination of those two things has made the system currently much worse than it was 10 or 15 years ago. And if we keep going down that road, in 10 or 15 years, it'll be a much harsher conversation than we're having now.
Yeah. And just very sort of tactically speaking, it's not fun to talk about either, right? Can you talk a little bit about just that level of contribution?
Yeah, look, it's a like I think, aging is hard to begin with, but conversations around aging are particularly difficult. Personal preferences come into play, family dynamics come into play. A long-term care insurance agent once said to me that when families don't plan for long-term care, while death sometimes bring families together, long-term care split families apart. Because the individual, the spouse, the kids, the in-laws, the grandkids who may be involved in taking care are not all on the same page. And folks disagree on what kind of care is needed, how to provide that care, how to fund that care. And that can be a very stressful situation. I think, medical care in the US can be stressful when rather than taking care of the patient, families become project managers.
Yes.
I think it is never more true than in long-term care, where the intent for everybody is great, wanting to really help the person. But the approach and the perspective they may come at it is very different, which creates a lot of stress and a lot of anguish. In avoiding that anguish, people don't plan for it. And when people don't plan for it, that becomes a more stressful situation when you're actually dealing with it.
Yeah. And then I think you just further compound that with the money aspect, right? Which is also not fun. Can you talk a little bit about the cost issues at that more sort of personal level?
Yeah. Look, I think we think aging care or long-term care is really about three things. It's thinking about funding for care, planning for care, and then finding care. So what I mean by that is on the funding for care, how do you plan to pay for long-term care needs? Most people underestimate the amount of long-term care they'll need. Roughly 70% of the aging population, the 65 and plus community that exists today, will need some kind of help. And that help will be paid for, either through an insurance policy or through personal private assets that you may have, or your family may have, or the government programs that you rely on may help. But starting to think about what that combination is for an individual at the time they'll need is really important. Planning for care. How do you stay healthy? How do you stay well? How do you live in your home? Most people want to age at home. How do you age in place? What are all of the steps and mechanisms you take care to make sure that you can age in place and you can age in your surroundings? That takes active work and active thinking. And then finally, finding care. When you can no longer age at home, or even if you are aging at home, if you need others to help you, how do you think about finding the care? What are the networks you tap into to enable you the right quality care at the right affordable levels? That becomes really important. So I think it's funding care, it's planning care, and then it's finding care that all become really, really important.
Yeah. So that's sort of how this is playing out in those family dynamics. If you look at it more of like at a society level, can you talk a little bit about how the aging care crisis is affecting our workforce?
Yeah, look, we spend a fair bit of time with employers and affinity groups who have members, who deal with these challenges at an individual level, personally for themselves, or deal with it at the family level. When you think about employers are seeing everything from short-term leaves to full exoduses from the workforce, where people are leaving to take care of their family or their loved one. In the short term, what's happening is the employer market is struggling because of loss of productivity, right? You've hired a bunch of people, they've come in, you've invested in training them, and a situation happens in their life that they need to pay attention to, but they suddenly leave the workforce for some period of time, or perhaps altogether. So in the short term, what's happening is you're seeing a loss of productivity at the employer level, at the business level. There's, of course, a whole dynamic that happens at the individual level who needs to take care of their family. At a long-term level, what we're afraid of is as multiple people leave the workforce and they take a backseat in their prime years, right? Most of the people who are leaving the workforce, we call them the sandwich generation, right? It's the notion of your career needs you, your kids need you, your parents need you. And when they take that time back in arguably the peak of their career journey, the ability to step back in 5 years later, 6 years later, and actually start back at the same level is very, very difficult. So that individual and that family has now faced a decrease in their long-term potential because of the time that they had to take away. And the domino effects of that, particularly when 20% of the country is over 70, are to be unknown. I was recently speaking to the CEO of a large insurance company who said the bulk of his disability customers take time off because they want to help a family member, an older family member, really settle in a new type of care, whether it's at home or in a community. And that's when they see people exiting the workforce. And that has significant personal, emotional impacts, but also real financial impacts for the individual getting care today and for the individual stepping out who will need care 30, 40 years down the road.
Yeah. So I know when I was sort of teeing you up at the beginning, we talked about your extensive career in financial and now aging care services. Can you talk a little bit about what your passion is in aging care? What made you take on this challenge?
Yeah, look, I mean, as a former banker and capital markets guy, I feel like I'm paying for my sins by being in this industry, really helping do good. I'd say, I think all of us who are in the aging care business and system have a personal why, right? People have entered this business because a life event happened that really forced them to think about what is the system they wanted for them and their loved ones. I too faced a situation like that. My father had a heart attack and a stroke within 2 months of each other, and as he recovered with me, and that was a long process, I saw firsthand how challenging the ecosystem of care provision was. I found myself to be in a very lucky situation where I had the resources to pay for it, and I perhaps had the network where I could call folks in to really tap in. But even having the resources and the network, I found it a struggle for him and for me and for my mom. And as we were going through this process, around the same time, my wife's father got ill. So we had both patriarchs of the family really going through difficult recovery journeys and health processes. These two individuals were folks that I'd looked up to. They had been people who had been immigrants to this country, had built their families and their lives, and I feel like they'd kind of suffered a lot through their years to make sure that we had the best life. In the years when they needed help, I felt helpless. They felt like they were a burden, and watching that dynamic untold, where the parent wasn't telling you how they were feeling, but you knew exactly how they were feeling, was soul crushing at many, many times.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that for them. And I didn't want that for me or my family. And it was then that I, to be honest, struggled with this notion of living in this country where we do a really good job of extending life, but not extending living. Living in arguably the most developed country, but doing a crappy job for our older Americans and older family members. And that's when this desire to sort of, there has to be a better way came up. And the banker turned into somebody who is helping fix a social problem, but one that also is a big economic opportunity for all of the businesses involved in the ecosystem that are feeling the pain themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So it just to, sort of put a bow on the issue, it really sounds like you're taking just a deeply personal, really weighty, unpleasant, emotional, and sometimes financial situation and compounding it with poor logistics in that there's not an easy way to navigate the system. There's not an easy way to know where to start. And, just some of those pieces of infrastructure that could really help people get through these weighty, unpleasant situations with feeling a little more supported.
If I envision going back to those moments in time when I was struggling through this as an individual, all you wanted to do is to make sure that your parent or your loved one was well taken care of. And you wanted to make sure that they had the support, they had the resources, they had people around them who knew what they needed, when they needed, how to help them. And rather than focusing on an individual's health, you became a project manager, right? You didn't know everything from paying for it to planning for it to finding it, like where to go, who to call, who could you trust. Somebody was coming in your house doing rehab, and were they qualified? Were they the right person? Were they the kind of person that my father would get along with? Making sure that as we worked for things around that, as he recovered from a stroke, did he have the right things at his house, whether it was a shower rod or whether it was sort of help with transportation. It was too busy figuring those things out without knowing if they were the right things. And it felt like throwing a bunch of spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. Yeah. And that's not a journey that any child should go through, or any parent should go through. The lack of resources, the lack of systems, the lack of information, the lack of organizations that frankly would help you was more evident than ever before. And unlike in medical care, when you have a system of providers or a funding mechanism when payers help you with things, in long-term care that did not exist. And that's what we're hoping that we can enable and make slightly better, right? It'll take years. It'll take many other actors to come together and do this. But that's what we're hoping to really adjust and fix.
Yeah. So let's get into that. What are the ways that we can move forward from here? And I imagine it's probably a mix of some things that individuals can take on themselves and probably also some infrastructure changes that public-private take on. So.
Yeah, look, I mean, if you think about any crisis that's happened in our country, our economy, and I'll point back to the kind of real estate crisis that happened in 2008, the fix has to come from a mix of private markets, public markets, and individuals, right? From a public market standpoint, the debate of is healthcare a right or or a privilege took 30 years to solve before national healthcare plans were put in. So, whether long-term care is a right or a privilege, I'll leave for the policymakers to decide, but the policymakers can do a better job of making sure there's educational resources and systems and rating agencies that can enable people to ask the right questions, think of the right questions, rely on affiliations that can give them information and help them create a process that guides through that. We've had a dearth of private market providers on both on the funding solutions side and the finding solutions side. On the funding solutions side, the insurance companies got a lot of their models wrong over the last 20 or 30 years, and many have exited the system. And some are getting back in, but how do private market players create solutions to help people pay for care? On the finding care, private markets need to do a better job of raising their ethos. There are certain bad providers and bad actors that have taken the industry down. I know I speak to other peers of CareScout in the ecosystem, and I hope that all of them find a way to sort of raise their game, because it is important and critical to do that as America continues to age. And then I'd say at an individual level, what can I do differently to avoid the situation I found myself in 5 years ago? And how do I plan for it? And how do I find the information and agree on certain decisions and wishes that I may have of how I may want to age, from a location perspective, from a type of care perspective, from a healthy living perspective, to those around me perspective. And how do I do that now so that, when it comes time, maybe way, way, way long in the future, I am prepared for it with a little bit of assistance from public and private markets.
You talked a lot about the what of care, right? And the information that you need and stuff like that. How do you think about what we have come to accept regarding the dignity of older adults as they age? Or do we have improvements there that we could make that need to factor into how we think about the aging care?
Yeah, look, we, at CareScout, as you know, we fundamentally believe that aging can be with confidence and with dignity. That confidence has to come from knowing and planning and equipping yourself that if you do the right things, you can age with grace. And aging does not have to be waiting for an outcome. Aging can be living, vibrantly, in your years and do the things that you want to do and have the support you want to have and be the same individual you always were. I love some of the photos that, we have over here, right here, Monty, the painter, has 400 or 500 pieces that they've done. We have a piece of his hanging in our offices now, which is a constant reminder of even at 92, you can do the things that you really love and bring to life art pieces that say different things about what you're creating. We want to enable that for people in their 80s, people in their 90s, and really live the kind of life that they have worked so hard for. And we want families to feel good about their loved ones living those confident and dignified lives by having access to a set of solutions, a set of resources, a set of information that enables them to age on their terms, and make the aging journey a less stressful one, a more confident one, one that, frankly, I'd want to live. Those are the types of journeys we're trying to create for, people who come to us.
Yeah. So just to wrap things up for our viewers, listeners, if you wanted to give, or say maybe this is your kids 30 years down the road, and you wanted to give them a few steps to take to make sure that they are going into the long-term care planning process, whether it's for themselves or their loved ones, in the right way. What are the top 3 or 4 things on that checklist?
I love that you think my kids would listen to me 30 years from now. As a parent of 16 and 13-year-olds, I'm not sure they listen to me now. No, look, I'd say, jokes aside, first of all, I hope they let me do what I want 30 years later. And I can call the shots at some point, if not now. I hope that having seen the journey of people who have aged before me, my family and I take the right steps to think about what my aging journey ought to look like way before it comes. We think about how to live healthier lives that have wellness as a core component of what we do. I hope that I plan to have the infrastructure around me that allows me to age at home. In my backyard around a fire pit, with a coffee or sometimes a bourbon in the cup.
Yeah.
It allows me to really do the things that I enjoy doing. I love playing tennis, and I hope that I can keep playing tennis as long as I can. I hope my family is part of my aging journey, where I see my kids and my grandkids, and and I'm able to do all the things I enjoy. When I can no longer do that, I hope we have thought about, what the next step is, whether it's a community, whether it's, spending some time at daycares, and how do I make sure that I have, again, the dollars and cents, but also the mindset and the enthusiasm of making the best of those decisions when they come. I have to be in the driver's seat for that, and I have to find some information myself. And I hope that public and private markets create some sort of an infrastructure and a system that enables me to get that information at an easier level, so I can plan for those steps when they do come.
Yeah. So just to sum things up, what I heard was, first and foremost, I think take care of yourself from a wellness perspective, so that you can enjoy your life for as long as you can, whether, physically, cognitively, make the decisions that will support the quality of living for as long as possible. And then the other thing that I heard was, have an opinion about what you want from your aging experience. Yeah. And then the last thing that I heard was, fight through the uncomfortableness and tell the people that you will depend on what those things are, right?
Yeah,
just have the conversations.
Yeah, I think you said it really well. Look, I think plan, communicate, align, right? Plan for what you want. To your point, as uncomfortable as maybe, go into it and decide that. Communicate with those around you, and then frankly make sure that they are on the same page and they have a plan around it as well. And if we're able to do that, hopefully we will make the aging journey for the next 70 million better than it was for the previous set that went before it.
Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us today, Samir. That brings us to the end of today's podcast. I want to thank everybody for watching. Please like and subscribe and share with all of your community that might need a little help navigating the aging journey now or later, which by my count in our conversation is pretty much all of us. So signing off for this time, this has been the ThereforCare podcast, and we'll see you next week.